In this city of dust and concrete, where the narrow streets seemed to suck in every breath of air, the trees were forgotten giants, their branches reaching toward the sky like desperate arms, desperately seeking the rain they could no longer find. The summer afternoon bathed the city in harsh light, a blinding light that reverberated off the aged facades of the buildings, creating a heavy, almost suffocating atmosphere. The air seemed to burn with every breath, saturated with heat, and every movement of the shadow on the dusty ground seemed to fight against the stifling heat. It was nothing compared to the heaviness that weighed on Madeline's heart. She walked alone, under the sparing shade of the trees, her steps measured, regular, defying the oppression of the sun. Her black skin absorbed the heat without blinking, her simple summer dress flowing lightly around her legs, her arms supporting the weight of a leather purse, a symbol of her own struggles. Her hair, carefully pulled back, flourished in a modest but determined hairstyle. She was 30 years old, but her eyes already carried the wisdom of a life well lived, a life forged in the fights for civil rights and equality. At that precise moment, her eyes, absolutely calm, shone with a glimmer of determination, as if she knew that that day, something important was going to happen. Something that would go beyond the simple framework of this stifling city. Madeline was not unknown in this neighborhood. Her presence here was not that of a simple passerby, but of a fierce activist for civil rights. She was a voice that carried, a beacon in the mist, a symbol of resistance against systemic injustices. Across the streets, more and more deserted because of the oppressive heat, eyes turned towards her, some admiring, others suspicious. The whispers behind his back, those words whispered in the dark corners of cafes or shops, were more and more frequent. However, Madeline had no use for these judgments. She moved forward without letting herself be shaken, an irreducible dignity in each of her gestures, in each of her steps. But on this day, that dignity would be put to the test. Downtown was only a few blocks away. She was heading to a crucial meeting with a group of activists, one she had been waiting for weeks. The growing noise of the discussions she was going to lead there, of the resistance she was going to organize, was already mingling with her own breathing. She knew that this meeting was a turning point, a moment when this city, would finally begin to understand what she had always known deep down. That change would come not from those in power, but from those, like her, who rose up despite everything. But it wasn't the meeting that would shape his day. Crossing a quiet park, almost deserted at that hour, she saw 2 police officers on patrol. Their eyes, marked by years of prejudice, lit up as soon as they saw Madeline. The city had this insidious way of breaking minds, of shaping consciences by creating invisible but powerful distinctions. Madeline did not fit into the boxes of those who looked at her. Black woman, strong, independent, determined. She carried a weight about her that others couldn't see, a weight that the police used to consider suspicious. Sergeant Lefebvre, a man of around 50, with an imposing build and a hard look, turned his head towards his partner, Officer Bernard. Bernard, much younger, his face still marked by the innocence of his first years of service, lowered his eyes as he followed the gestures of his superior. Lefebvre had already made the decision. He knew that women like Madeline, black women who dared to stand tall, were disruptive elements in this unforgiving city. He didn't need words to give his order. His eyes alone were enough. They were going to arrest this woman for no reason other than the fact that she wasn't where they thought she should be. "Where are you going like that?" Lefebvre's voice thundered through the air, sharp and authoritative. He stood in front of her, without even trying to hide his contempt. Madeline stopped without rushing, as if she knew that this confrontation was not a simple police matter, but a test that she would have to overcome. His eyes, fixed on Lefebvre, betrayed no emotion. She had seen those kinds of looks too many times to be intimidated by them. "I'm going to a meeting," she replied calmly, her voice measured and clear. Sergeant Lefebvre nodded, as if his suspicions were confirmed. "A meeting?" He repeated the question with a sarcasm that cut through the heated air. "Are you sure? You look a little suspicious." Young Bernard, more hesitant, took a step forward, his eyes filled with internal doubts. There was still room for uncertainty, but it was starting to feel overwhelming. "Do you have any papers?" he asked in a low, almost trembling voice, as if he wasn't completely comfortable with the situation but didn't know how to avoid it. Madeline felt her heart grow heavy, not from fear, but from a familiar sadness. She knew it wasn't her they were seeing. It was the image they had of a black woman, of an activist, of a rebel. It was the anger of these looks, of a power that we are trying to control, of a look of authority that was imposed on her. But she didn't give in. She knew it, and the air around her seemed to thicken. Have you ever seen a black citizen moving freely without being controlled? She asked in a calm but firm voice, the words ringing like a nagging question, an unspoken but obvious truth. Sergeant Lefebvre sneered. It was not a happy laugh, but a laugh that fed on his power, a laugh full of disdain. "We'll see about that," he said icily. His eyes narrowed menacingly, and with a sudden movement he turned his gaze towards Bernard. "Tie her to the tree." Without warning, Bernard grabbed Madeline's arm with cold violence, his fingers tight around her skin. The other police officer, Lefebvre, grabbed her purse with brutal force, almost tearing it out of her hands. They forced her forward, her gaze fixed on an imposing tree, an old oak whose twisted branches seemed to bear witness to years of struggle. It was a majestic tree, a symbol of nature's silent resistance, but on this day it became the site of its humiliation. Every step she took seemed heavy as lead, but Madeline refused to submit. She walked stiffly, without a single complaint, but a gleam of defiance shone in her eyes. The police expected to see her give in, to see fear painted on her face, but she did not bend. She knew they were looking for more than just an arrest. They sought to break his spirit, to show him who had the power, to remind him of his place. But Madeline had no room to give. The place that they wanted to impose on her was that of a black woman, in silence and submission, but she was none of that. She knew her dignity was not for sale. When Madeline's wrists were tied to the tree, the tension in the air became almost palpable. The police officers looked at her, satisfied smiles on their faces, as if they had won a resounding victory. But what they didn't know was that victory was not measured by the pain inflicted, but by the ability to resist. "Did you think you could just walk here like you were important?" Lefebvre threw the question with cruel contempt, his eyes filled with the certainty that the world belonged to him, that he had the right to decide who deserved to breathe the same air as him. "We will teach you to know your place." Madeline did not need to answer. His gaze was sufficient, his silence a powerful cry that echoed in the darkness of injustice. The police stopped there, frozen in their ignorance, their blind cruelty only accentuating their own insignificance. Minutes passed like hours, the hot sun filtering through the leaves, casting distorted shadows on the ground. The murmurs of passers-by were more and more numerous, but the fear of the return of authority prevented them from approaching. Everything seemed frozen, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. And it was then that the engine of a car, at first distant, was heard, interrupting the heavy silence. Far from being an emergency vehicle, it was a symbol, a sign that the balance of power was going to be upset. The black car, massive and imposing, crept slowly through the park, its solemn appearance contrasting with the agitation that reigned around it. Madeline recognized the mayor's car. The sound of tires on gravel grew closer and closer, and the policemen's gazes froze in anguish. The mayor, a charismatic man, followed by his lawyers and a team of journalists, moved forward with a determined step. When his eyes met Madeline's, he stopped, a quiver of pain running through his face. He never wanted his sister to be reduced to this state. He had always been there for her, but the scene before him, his sister tied to a tree, made him question himself. It was a public humiliation, and he couldn't stand that. "You know who you tied to that tree?" The mayor's voice was low, but every word, every syllable, exuded an undeniable authority, a calm but unwavering menace. His eyes stared at Lefebvre and Bernard with a cold intensity that made them waver. The police officers exchanged uncertain looks, their certainty wavering. "An activist, eh?" Bernard began, but quickly fell silent under the mayor's glaring gaze. "No," cut the mayor in an icy voice, moving closer to Madeline. "You have suspended a renowned attorney, the sister of this city's mayor, and an essential voice for justice. Lefebvre and Bernard were trapped. The light of truth burst forth, shattering their illusions of impunity. They had not seen the woman they were humiliating. They did not understand the importance of the act they had just committed. It was not too late, but the marks of the injustice inflicted on Madeleine were already etched into the very fabric of the city. Madeleine, her wrists painful, but her heart intact, turned her gaze towards her brother. She knew that this moment, although terrible, held something greater. A tipping point. A turning point in the fight for justice. She wasn't broken. She was stronger than ever. The scene of his humiliation would soon be that of his ascension. The wind of revolt would blow through this city, carrying away prejudices, injustices, and silences. Madeleine would not let herself be defeated. She knew that history was being rewritten, and that this city would soon look at itself in the mirror of its own contradictions.